I would like to introduce Ben Lindengreen. He is the head of cyber resilience, Pay UK. And as well, I would like to invite James Gerber, as well the Chief Financial Officer, IronNet. I would like as well to start with introducing my guest here, and I'm very pleased to have such an expert at my right hand to facilitate the discussions. But yes, Ben Lindengreen is the head of cybersecurity resilience by UK. Ben has joined the Payment Council by UK predecessors in 2011 and has over 20 years technical and managerial information security experience gained whilst working in both consultancy and in-house roles. As a head of cyber resilience for Pay UK, Ben works to support a vibrant UK economy, enabling a global competitive payment industry through the provision robust resilience, collaborative retail payment service, rules and standards for the benefit and meeting evolving needs of all users, moving more than 7 trillion every year through basic direct credit, direct debit, faster payment, check, and PIM. Yeah. Actually, Ben has really a huge number of experience. I did not go through all of them, but I'll give him the chance to add a little bit more if he like. We got as well James as the Chief Financial Officer, IronNet Cybersecurity, responsible for strategic financial planning and direction of company. James has been instrumental to IronNet global worth achieved through solid organizational performance of financial technical operations and collaborative approaches. In his career of 30 years working in finance, strategy, and information technology operation, Jamie has held various senior financial positions in investment, acquisition, and merge. Jamie has earned his BSc in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Princeton University. This beginning his career as an electronic and system engineer with General Electric. So, I think this is a very good fundamental to talk about risk and cyber risk from the engineering perspective as well. Thank you very much. The discussion about assessing risk and cost and solutions, and we have seen this morning actually some of the discussions, some of the questions raised from the audience in this room and as well from online related to this topic. But I would like actually to start with questions I was asked today from my master student. At 11 o'clock, I deliver an online lecture here for the next room. And we talk about about the security and the cyber security. And one of them raised the question, why always security is a matter? We are hearing there is always advanced technologies, advanced solutions, and so on. But the security always is, we're hearing that is the incident is getting more and more, and as well more companies, more businesses fall victims into the cyber attacks. And why is that? And it was really a very good question. Maybe we start with this, for example, while we talk about the technology today, is do you think that, for example, that the fast technology evolution could be one of the causes, because a lot of applications, software tools, platforms, they are developed fast, very fast, and release straight away to the client, to the customers, then collecting feedback, release again, and so on. So that sometimes as well, because all this development based on the ease of use of the technology, and they are not taking the security into account or into consideration. So that we found out, for example, as I said, some of the companies, some of the businesses within the experience we have, that is actually many factors are playing a role in that. For example, some of the factors actually, the culture of that organization or the senior management, or sometimes actually is related to the appetite of the manager, how much he is really willing to take the risk, although in some cases without, not based on an evidence that, for example, they are subject into attacks, cyber attacks, or being attacked already. So without further delay, for the panel to talk about. Ben, would you like to add anything in this?
I think with regards to applications and the development and the speed that you mentioned there, I think sometimes for those companies that are developing it, particularly things like Internet of Things, there isn't actually a massive downside in releasing the product as it is, even if there are security vulnerabilities, because they've already got the money for the product beforehand. So, and there are very little impunitive costs that they can face as a result of it once it's gone out there. So it's not really in their best interests from a commercial perspective to really spend that money to actually get the products to be good products, because people are buying them, particularly when they've been they're from a global marketplace, so they've not necessarily even made in the country where you're buying them, so there's little from a consumer protection perspective. So it's all about the ease and speed to market. If they can get their product to market quickly, then they get the money in and then they can continue to further develop it. If they were to spend more time, more money to do a proper job, then they're actually not making as much money. So from a purely commercial perspective, I can understand why they don't do that. And the challenge is that governments have to look at the way that they can actually try and place minimum requirements upon these products, in the same way that you have kite marks, you have the CE mark in Europe, to get a certain minimum level of standard. But I think from a coding perspective, that's quite difficult to do.
Okay, that's excellent. I mean, James, from that, to pick on one point that's been mentioned, Fat, about regulatory or the regulation, let's say, role on trying to put or enforce security by design when you start or by default. Is that, you think, is something that could contribute to the solution in general by reducing let's say the attack factors related to technologies?
Yeah, I think it's a way to think about the problem, but I think it's up to the application developers to figure out what the right way to build security into the solution is. I think when we take a look at the three major attack vectors that are really succeeding these days, they go after things that all of our systems have depended on for quite some time. One, trusted source, right? That's why compromising the application itself is a vulnerability, because we've built our systems to trust those applications. So you're right, the applications developers bear a responsibility, but they're the ones that know the architecture of their code. Second thing that we depend on every day is that our logs are going to tell us what's going on, that our firewall logs, that our endpoint logs are actually reporting into our system what's going on. Well, current attack tools turn them off. They just blind them. They just, the logs keep coming, but not reporting on the thing that's going on. And lastly, there's the hide in the noise problem. And again, this is where, we've assumed that if you can, spot it in logs, then that's fine. But if the logs are off and you're using behaviors and hashes that are new, then you're going to need better and different tools. So that's the risk profile we're facing, and I think you're absolutely right. The applications are one of the vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's, in this point as well, James, is what are the loss curve looks like, for organization currently in terms of the consequences of the cyber attacks? how they assess that, for example. As I said, I mean, maybe some of the factors that depends of the culture of that organization. How they assess that that loss, for example, if they really do.
Well, remember if you're attacked and you lose, the loss is big. If you're not attacked, then things can look okay, right? But this is the task that the insurers have today, is to try to figure out how does this risk profile that's pretty bad, and there are just too many ways for companies to get compromised now. How do you really assess this, as what I put a little earlier, but for the grace of God go I problem? So if the premise is that it's just a matter of time before a criminal or nation state team comes after your company, then that's the profile that you have to, as a cyber defender, think about. And then how do you think about that solving that problem without just asking for more money than your company or organization can afford?
Brilliant. Ben, about cyber risk planning. I mean, most of the organizations, again, we came across that they're adopting that cyber risk management metrics, okay, or frameworks. And in many cases, for example, and I mentioned that here, especially for the FinTech company or financial services sector, that in many cases, for example, some of the risk are buried in the low risk or low probability envelope, or sometimes they go within these metrics into the lower band, low risk band, but if you look about the consequences of this severity of this low probability risk, it would look, for example, really huge, especially as mentioned in the FinTech or financial service sector or healthcare as well in some cases. What is the risk planning looks like? I mean, in industry, how they really adapt to look at all this complexity in terms of issues facing.
Well, I think the first thing is that cyber risk is just one part of your operational risk. It is part of your overall organization. So an organization should be focusing on their business and the risk facing their business. So looking at the data, but also looking at what their important business services are. I think too often an organization can be focused on cyber aspects and not really understanding what the impact to an organization would be if your important business services were compromised. And associated with that is how long you could afford to have those important business services out of action. It's not just about suggesting that a cyber attack will happen. You need to look at it holistically and look at the impact to your business. So that's where in the UK the regulators have released their operational resilience framework, which really looks at that. And the important thing is to understand your business, understand how long you can be without parts of your business. And then the best thing and the most important thing to do in many ways is actually to test that. You can't just assume you're resilient unless you actually do testing so you can look at how you would recover from an incident. Because too often we can make an assumption, and then when something actually does happen, you realize that because you haven't tested it, you've missed some fundamental elements. It takes you a lot longer to recover, and that's where your costs can be a lot substantially higher than you assumed, because you hadn't done the testing and you hadn't really understood your actual important business services in the first instance. Mm-hmm.
That's right. I mean, James, always the adoption security controls has always the main objective to maintain the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of data and system. But do you think that is, for example, this adoption has to be looked at on regular basis because they are changing within the nature of the business, the new models of business, the way even running business, and the pandemic as well, one of the best examples in that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are several points of view that can be helpful here, and I'll speak as a CFO first, because I actually have had internal controls over financial reporting for some time, right? There's a risk framework. We have a controls design that we're obligated to fulfill. And actually, there's a subset of that, which are the internal controls over the information systems on which my financial reporting depends. So there's actually a really good framework that's out there that in financial reporting has been around for a while. I think what's really helpful is to see this convergence of frameworks on the just the overall risks to a company's operations, something much broader than just financial reporting, that can use the same constructs. And so I think that convergence is a really helpful one. And taking Ben's point as well, taking that point of view that is bigger than your own organization, I think, is also important. And that means looking at your supply chain and looking at how they're dealing with their risks and how well aligned their risk solutions are with yours. I think some of the best companies right now are taking a very cooperative and collaborative view with their primary supply chain partners. And when their controls and your controls are well aligned, then you really are now starting to get into a much better protected picture than if you just looked at it as just from the perspective of your own enterprise.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, do you think as well, Ben, any security controls should be driven by by the financial service provider, then after that, after placing that, will be more adopted by the FinTech technology, for example?
I think an organization's security controls should be driven by the business requirements, and it should be at a level that is required for the sensitivity of the data, the importance of the process. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, and I think that organizations need to look at that. Not all of the data that an organization has will be of the same value to that organization. So you need to ensure that your controls are supporting your business objectives, because security is a cost to the business, so you need to make sure that you're putting in controls that give the right level to enable the business to actually do their day-to-day job. Because unless you're a cybersecurity firm looking at specific security elements, then cyber isn't actually likely to be your business's main responsibility. So you need to make sure that the controls that you have enable your organization to do what they need to do. And if they're overly onerous, then actually they may be the wrong controls to have. And in those circumstances, what you tend to find is that employees will try to get around it so that they can do their jobs.
I think, yes, I agree with that, is that the security context for yours is different from mine. And so that's why in every organization, they need to know what they are protecting, first of all, in order to have a better use of the resources available for them. So I think one of the costs associated now or within the cybersecurity protection, and one of the need funding from the organization, which is cyber insurance, and to ensure cyber assurance. What do you think about that? I mean, how can the cyber about the cyber insurance and cyber assurance? What is your thought about that, James?
Well, are you talking the what do I pay for my insurance question, or what do I pay for my cybersecurity resources within the company? Because they're
Yeah, I think it's a new cost for the companies now to have cyber insurance.
Right.
And what's your thought about that?
Sure. So, look, just about everybody in this room that pays for cyber insurance knows what's going on with the premiums, right? And why are the premiums going up? Because we're all a little more vulnerable than we'd like to be, and we're a little more vulnerable than our insurers would like us to be, right? So the only way that those premiums are going to go down, we're not going to not be insured, but the only way they're going to go down is by each of us taking on these risks that are unfortunately showing themselves to be bigger than we're up to, and then figuring out how to apply the right kind of resources so that those vulnerabilities don't get exploited. Yeah. But a different point of view is going to be needed because the way most of us are going about it today is not working.
Yeah, brilliant. I think there was a question was raised this morning about the data sharing. Maybe we raised the same question. What do you think between the big companies, for example, to collaborate in order to come over that, as you said, the bigger issues, which is bigger than the actual organization or individual organizations?
Well, I think that's one of the leading theories that's out there, is that when we stop taking an attitude of defending in isolation and try to figure out how to have properly anonymized but really pervasive sharing, so that when your organization has solved a problem that I'm working on, and we can be precise enough with each other that it's actually the same problem, not a similar looking one, then that's an efficiency that is immediately accessible. And I think that goes to this question of, we can't keep spending more money in the same model, right? That's not sustainable, and it's not really solving the problem. So we got to think about it differently. How can we operate in a really different way that lets us, as friendly organizations, actively and in almost real time help each other. Okay. And that can change the picture.
Okay. Ben, do you have any view on that?
I agree completely with James. I think information sharing is key, not just within industries, but across industries. But one of the most important things about information sharing is that actually you're in a position where you can use that information to the benefit of your organization. Because there's no point in information sharing, against vulnerability again for X system or Y system, if you're not actually sure whether you've got that system running in your own organization. So aligned with that, you do need to concentrate on those security fundamentals. I know a lot of people will say security basics, things like patching, vulnerability management, but for me, basics suggest that they're easy. And they're not, particularly in large organizations. Understanding all of the systems that you've got, your assets, that is a non-trivial task. So you shouldn't underestimate the work that's needed to do that. But to be able to use that information and actually gain the benefits from it, you do need to understand those things. So, I think it's working in parallel with that. It's looking to improve those aspects, which are the ones that are most frequently attacked by the bad guys, but also then give you in a position where you can share information. And I think it's the sharing part that's key as well. Organizations shouldn't just look to be a sink where they receive all of the information in. The only way that information sharing is truly effective is when it's a two-way flow of information as well.
Yeah, this brings us to the ransomware attacks, which is now is very common and popular. And the criminal the hackers become more aggressive towards ransomware. This is a profitable tools for them. So in that perspective, why we still, as an industry, although we have this brilliant framework in cyber risk assessment and managing, why we still really hit or hardly hit by this type of attacks?
Well, my glib answer would be because it works and it's easy to do. That's why ransomware is successful, and it's quite hard to target against because there are those fundamentals, and until we start building up that, and unfortunately, it's quite a low cost to entry for the attackers to do these things. They know that they can get away with it, they know that they can do it at scale, and you don't need to hit just a low number. You can send this quite wide and then get those elements, and unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast, and you're seeing it evolve as it is shown to be successful. Unfortunately, that then causes it to build up as well. So not only do you then get attackers encrypting the data and offering it for ransom, there's now the whole double extortion where they're then threatening to release it to your customers or just generally on the internet as well. So unfortunately, there's a lot of targets out there, and even when some organizations have got good security controls and aren't going to be immediately hit by this, there will always be those targets that unfortunately haven't got the controls, which means that it's still a very attractive proposition for an attacker.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it is well, I think because of that, if I don't want to agree, James, the skills, the decrease of the skill needed to carry on such attacks is unbelievable. I mean, they don't, some of the attacks, they don't need any IT background or computer security, computer skills. You know, it's, you find some of the kids or some of the criminals, sometimes they hired the ransomware. And what do you think?
Yeah, I think there are perhaps really kind of two questions in here. You know, you are immediately talking about the capabilities of current tools that are out there, and they're very advanced, right? You don't necessarily have to be all that skilled to use them. But it really doesn't end there, I think, as many of us know, is that the really serious attacks that many of us should worry about the most are actually perpetrated by entire teams coming against our companies and agencies. And I'd like it, I think we'd all like it to be differently, but really the geopolitical tensions out there that are bringing nation states into play here, you know, they have a point to make, not just money to take. And so, so I think you're right. The tools themselves are very capable. But I think one other point that may be worth drawing out in terms of, you know, why is ransomware succeeding so much? And it may go a little bit to where we need to evolve the sharing methodologies that we use. Right at the moment, remember, we share when we decide to share. We don't share all the time. Mm-hmm. And so having frameworks that can essentially safely and anonymously share all the time can provide that ability with the proper speed for me to know this thing that's going on one of my devices actually was the same sort of thing. There was a ransomware attack in your company yesterday or 2 hours ago. And if it took time in your company to decide what the problem was, characterize the problem, put it out into the ISAC, and have the ISAC share it around, you know, I've been hit, and just about everybody else in this room's been hit by the time that gets around. So I think that's where finding these kind of new sharing constructs that can be much faster, you know, much more pervasive and much more precise are the kinds of things that are going to really be necessary to let us keep up as defenders with the speed of the attackers.
Ben, what the organization should do more to protect their customer data, and at the same time they do what they have to do to progress with their business, and at the same time as well they need to satisfy or comply with the regulator rules and policies and procedures. How the organization they should go around these issues?
I think for organizations, again, it's about understanding what data they have and what data they need. And I think too often organizations will look at data, particularly historic data, and go, oh, there may be a need for that in the future, so we'll keep it. And if you no longer need the data, then don't store it, because if it's not on your systems, then it can't be exposed, it can't be used against you. So there are those elements, but also make sure that your data and the controls for it are associated with the actual value of the data as well. Don't just take a blanket approach to data as if there's just one set of data in your organization and have the same level of controls there, because that probably means that some of the data will be you'll have put insufficient controls in, and for other bits of the data, it'll actually be, you'll have to go through too many bells and whistles to get to that data, which will cause friction. So again, we sometimes talk as if cyber is the answer to all of these elements, but it's not actually. Many of this is related to your business processes. It's really understanding how you use the data, understanding who in your organization needs to use the data, and then who outside of your organization needs to use the data as well. So it's not just about the use of third-party systems, but who is that data shared with. The more that you understand these things, the more you then can actually make sure that you put appropriate controls in across the range, but it's about appropriate controls.
I mean, James, and on the top of Ben, what Ben said, I mean, do you think, for example, that there should be better use of data analytics in the organization to have a better estimation of assessment of current controls or security controls, and what might they will need in the future in line of the future or attacks, let's say, if they are heading to a new direction or a new change or opening a new branch or whatever the plan is. But do you think should be data analytics could be the tools or the help to come over this issue?
Well, to be certain, yes, right? The problem is you can analyze data in many different ways, and you can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these things. But I think, one of the useful things about the financial services industry is that we've been analytically based from the beginning. We're trained from our very first day on the job to be analytically oriented around the thing that we manage, which is money, right? But doing the right analysis is, I think, the really fundamental answer here. It's not, oh, I've applied artificial intelligence, I've applied this new machine learning. That actually, just because you're applying the technique doesn't mean you're actually applying it in the right way against the right data. So, I think our sense is that analytics and automation is really fundamental, but you have to be very thoughtful about whether the analytics you're running are sufficiently flexible and sufficiently able to spot the thing that you actually need to, be looking for. Otherwise, you have a lot of fancy words and not a lot of useful results.
Okay, brilliant. I think we shall go for, I see a couple of questions from the audience, and I would like to go through them, if you don't mind. The first questions came from techniques to model and assess the severity of incidents have been around for decades. Why doesn't cybersecurity promote and embed this? In general, I'd like to.
Yeah, I'll jump in very quickly. But look, I think we're still looking for very robust but commonly accepted frameworks for risk assessment that we can all use. And the keynote panel this morning was really talking about the UK government promulgating some frameworks that can be broad enough and effectively enough used. So I think just getting some better, more robust frameworks that are commonly applied will take us a long way.
I think the only thing I'd add is that it depends, I think, on the sector somewhat. So within the financial sector in the UK, I think we're relatively well along with it. Working closely with the National Cybersecurity Centre. There's cyber incident response guidelines. But again, I'd go back to one of my earlier comments. Cyber is just part of operational risk. So when you've got well-established operational risk and you've got the incident processes for there, we shouldn't be looking at cyber as if it's some special element and it's unique and it's special. It's not. It's just part of your operational resilience. So use those incident response capabilities and the levels that you've got within your organization already, and then just look at it, look at the cyber incident in line with those.
Okay, thank you. I think there's someone is predicting we are heading towards a cyber catastrophe event in near future. And he asking, are current risk transfer techniques sufficient to mitigate such an event? Any thought on that?
I think if it is an actual catastrophe, then no, you can't really transfer the risk. The question is how likely it is. If it's of such a sufficient magnitude, then you're not going to be able to put in any meaningful controls, although those costs of those controls would be crippling to any business or any organization. I think what you need to do, and we've seen this with ransomware, you need to make sure that you've got backups, that you've got all of the processes, and again, going back to an earlier thing, test these. So within the operational resilience framework that the UK's financial regulators have come out, they have the concept of severe but plausible scenarios. So test your operational resilience for dealing with those elements. And again, a cyber catastrophe is only just one element. You know, you could have a major gas leak, an explosion that takes out your head office and everything. These things aren't just restricted to cyber, so your testing regime should look at that and look at how you would cope in one of those areas. But unless you test it and really walk through these things, then it would be very difficult to know whether an organization could recover from it.
Yeah. I mean, James, any thought on that?
Well, I think I would just come back to this earlier question of what can we do as organizations to be more successful against the attackers, right? The very thing that's driving insurance premiums up is that success. And I think, you know, we have to ask ourselves as practitioners in these areas those really hard questions: is what we're doing today taking all the right steps that we should, and do we need to change our picture? And I think that we're reminded by the successes that are being had out there that we actually do need to find some better ways to go about defending ourselves. And you know, I think defending together is going to be one of those elements.
I think as every organization, they are aiming to have a robust business continuity in place. And again, as mentioned, depends on their capability and culture, even resources. They will, if they manage to map the two things about the current controls and the probability of the incidents or the attacks, for example, or the cyber catastrophic incident in the future, then again using data analytics, then they will be in a better position, because they won't be spending money, for example, in some of the controls which are maybe the probability of that is really very low, or if, for example, the parameter of that 9 out of 10, for example, so that there is no need to buy that control if it's not going to happen or never happened at your organization. I think as well before you mentioned the hurricanes in the USA and the banks and payments, and so that was a very good example. I mean, this is, if you know that's going to happen, and is often most likely going to happen, then you should be prepared for that. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I would just go back to some headlines, though, in the United States not long ago when the Colonial Pipeline was shut down for only a couple days. But the impact of that shutdown was sufficient to get the gas lines going in pretty much the entirety of the southeast United States. And I understand there might be a little experience with gas lines around here, by the way. But, I think we as organizations rightfully should start with our own operational risk and make sure that, if we're the Colonial Pipeline or the bank equivalent of it, that our continuity of operations are such that we do get back online quickly. But I do think that we can't really stop there, because it's the impact on our service area, impact on our customers when we are out for even a couple days, that are important to consider as well. So I think both pieces have to be in the formula.
Thank you. There's another question here. How do CISOs and XSOs develop a business case around the new cyber tech investment when risks are not quantifiable?
Well, so I'm usually the CFO that has to say, "Oh, what a great idea!" And actually, I did challenged the group a little earlier today and the chief information security officers to essentially come to your CFOs, come to my equivalents, with those really thought out hard problem solutions. What we should not be saying yes to are the halfway solutions that actually are going to still leave the organization vulnerable. But when a really thought through, this will really address the problem for the company kind of solution comes forward, that's where I need to, in my job, listen carefully and provide my support for approving those kinds of things.
And I think building on James' point, whilst the cyber risk may not be 100% quantifiable, if you're looking at it in business terms, if you're very clear about the assets that it's protecting, about the business processes that it's protecting and the way that it's working, then that will make a much more pertinent business case and really get it across. The challenge I think we have as CISOs and senior leaders is when we go in and say, the sky's falling, we need to buy X or Y. It's very it's poorly defined. There's no real tangible benefit to the CFO because we can't talk in the specifics that the CFOs are used to. And we need to be clearer, and that's where we need to work with the business. Cyber, information security, it doesn't exist in isolation. It should be supporting the business processes. It should be improving business processes, hopefully, by streamlining controls, making it easier for people to do their jobs. So we need to look at, when we're looking at a proposed solution, how does it make people's lives easier and enable them to do their jobs and support the business?
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, there is another question. How do you propose that the insurance industry copes with the nation-state sponsored cyber risk? Should this be covered? Any view on that?
Well, look, remember, an insurer is just insuring a loss. It's in the insurance business, there's this notion of a highly protected risk, right? When we're looking at property insurance, when we put sprinkler systems in, then we're going to get a lower insurance premium. So the same is the case in cyber. So though there really isn't this notion yet within the insurance industry of what a highly protected risk looks like, I think there should be, first of all. And you can see things like the Cyber Catalyst program and some other things really moving in that direction. But fundamentally, it's up to the companies to be avoiding the risk and having good controls to mitigate the risk. And when we have done our job there, then the insurance premiums will reward us.
Yeah, I think there's the cyber or the insurance companies or organizations themselves struggling to define that or to assess the amount of risk or the type of that risk and how they're going to insure it, as you mentioned.
Right, but remember, insurance is only coming into play when the damage has been done.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the same, we talked about law enforcement as well. When law enforcement is called in only once the damage is done, then here's the bad news, damage has been done. So, the task is really how do we rethink this problem so that the damage won't be done.
Okay, yeah.
And building on James' point, I'd just like to add two things. It's quite rare for any government to definitively state that an attack was via a nation state. So you've got that challenge from an insurance perspective. But the other thing, I think sometimes we talk about nation states and we work on the assumption that every attack that they do is incredibly sophisticated, that no one could prevent it. Most nation state attacks will use the easiest attack that they can find to get into a system. So if they've attacked you and they've taken you out, but they've gone through a phishing attempt, well, yes, it's a nation state actually carrying it out, but was it your lack of those fundamental security controls that prevented it? So that causes challenges in itself, and again, it comes down to, James, about the insurer will want to know that you've got a good level of base controls and that they're effective, they're well managed, no matter who the attacker is.
Yes, yeah, indeed. There's a last question, I think, yes. Does there need to be a change in mindset around the cybersecurity and move away from seeing it as a huge cost and towards seeing it as a saving on costs?
Well, cybersecurity is a cost center, whether we like it or not, right? But the fundamental question always comes down to, is that spend achieving an important outcome for the company? Some of those costs are commoditized costs, and they should be, kind of buy them at the least cost you can find. But there are other parts of your cyber spend that are strategic and essential to actually the continuity of your operations. And delineating between those two types, I think, is really important. And when you do, then you can focus on the latter as the type of spend that really makes the difference.
I agree completely. Cyber will always be a cost, but it's the way that we present that to our leadership, we present it, and we make sure that it actually improves matters. When we put in additional controls, sometimes they may actually be additional controls, but they still make it easier for the end user to log on. That could be multi-factor authentication that is done via your phone and everything. For the end user, suddenly things have become a little bit more streamlined, everything's a little bit easier. That could be a big cost, but you're actually getting a big business benefit from it as well. And when we pursue these things purely as a security control, historically security departments will be the department that likes to say no, then it will always be perceived as a major cost. If we can help people to do their jobs securely, then it'll still cost them money, but I think it'll be received much better among senior leadership.
Thank you very much. I think there is as well, I would like to ask this question myself, about the shortage in cyber skills and as well individuals or workforce in cybersecurity. And as well, I am aware that many of organizations, they find it very difficult to recruit the right people, for example. But I came across, for example, some of the examples that most of the job description for the cybersecurity is written by an HR person. And sometimes, they just go and pick up maybe 100 types of skills needed, which prevent people from coming forward and apply to that job and so on. And this was as well discussed in one of the cybersecurity recruitment events. What is your thought on that? Just as it's outside of all that.
Well, it's just like your systems. You have to be picking those skills that you most essentially need, and then finding the ways to apply them as efficiently as possible. And this is, I think, where collective defense can mean that smaller organizations that can't afford entire, fully skilled teams, even if they were available, find ways to cover off their operational risk without breaking the bank on people.
I think sometimes we focus too much on requiring specific technical requirements from an individual rather than a certain mindset. Sometimes the best security professionals are those ones that are inquisitive, that look at something, will look at it from different ways. It's about diversity of thought, looking into this. So I think we as an industry need to be a little less prescriptive on our actual requirements for the job there and understand more. Because some of the technical skills, to be honest, aren't really that difficult to teach. They're quite straightforward. It's a lot of tool-based elements, but it's about the mindset. It's about getting someone that fits in, that understands the way to help support your business and to help it grow. So I think we should be a little bit broader in our mindset when it comes to hiring.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we are done here, and I really thank you very much, James and Ben. This was really impressive contribution and very, a good insight into what's going on in terms of cybersecurity, cyber loss with the organization. And thank for the audience for being good listeners. Thank you.
Thank you.